So good to see you all back. Full bellies, rested. You feeling good? Yes. In Austria, we call it Schnitzelkoma. That's when you're like, after you had a schnitzel, you're like, I hope this is not going to happen. If you need to nap, do it like that. It's okay. The people in the live stream, hi, by the way, are not going to see you. They're going to see us. But I can actually promise you're not going to want to sleep, because the next panel is going to be not only insightful, but I can promise also, I have the feeling it's going to be fun. You did not see the three amazing humans I'm going to get on stage. They were giggling, discussing where to sit on stage. So this was the conversation we had right now. So what's going to happen right now, we're going to dive into the multi-stakeholder collaboration panel. What does that mean? This means, so we're going to have a real talk about what it means to do things properly when tackling social inequalities in a time of polarization. And we have two, and actually three amazing fellows. So we have one fellow, this is Sascha Haselmayer himself. As we know, he wears different hats. On the one hand, he's part of the organizing team, he's a partner at Ashoka Germany, but is also a fellow himself. He's gonna moderate this conversation with our two amazing fellows, Rosanne Haggerty and Tessy Britton. And both of them have done amazing things. They're gonna talk about the right way. And we heard yesterday in the panel, Andrew was talking about Rosanne's work in New York, in the US, what impact it had, but I'm not gonna take anything away because Sascha, Tessy, and Rosanne, the stage is yours.
Thank you. And can we have a quick, energizing applause for Stephanie, who's doing such an incredible job. So just as you read out the topic of this panel, multi-stakeholder collaboration for true participation, I thought, my God, you know, I thought that talking about public procurement for years on end was rough, but this is kind of not a very sexy title, is it? Only to the initiated. So let's make multi-stakeholder collaboration sexy and meaningful here today. But of course, aligning multiple stakeholders around a common vision is kind of the holy grail for achieving real change. And here we have Tessy and Rosanne, who are doing it in communities with real and lasting impact on people's lives. And I would say both of them have a reputation, and you can ask anyone, for doing this properly, which means not just listening and engaging people, but approaching collaboration with a scientific mindset to always learn what works, and we'll get into this. So this is a super privilege. We have quite a lot of time. We'll try to go deep into the subject matter, but to start with, Rosanne, maybe you can introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here with both of you and all of you. I work principally in the United States. The organization I lead, Community Solutions, works with over 140 communities across the country to help them get to a lasting end to homelessness that leaves no one behind. A measure we use is called functional zero, which means homelessness is rare and brief and non-recurring. And we also work with partners who similarly lead national networks in 5 other countries, serving about 70 other communities at this point. And I'll say more about how we do it, but essentially we kind of fit on that kind of category that's called a field catalyst of...
You have so many important things to say, we want to hear you.
Is this shut off now? Yeah. Okay. Should I start again? I'll skip into, we work in sort of a fashion called field catalyst, if you're familiar with that term, which is we're really trying to change the whole ecosystem around homelessness and help organizations in each of these communities that we work in and where our partner organizations work internationally just organize everyone who touches the issue of homelessness to get to this new standard of work and this new set of outcomes.
Yeah, can you maybe, just to recap, because what you're achieving is called functional zero, and I want everyone here to understand that what Rosanne is doing is bringing homelessness to what is called functional zero, and I think it's really important for us to understand how transformative that is.
Functional zero, I think, is a pretty powerful concept for any of our work. It basically means, in the case of homelessness, that communities have reached a state of equilibrium, where they know what they need to be doing every day to stay ahead of the issue, where most of their energy is now placed on prevention, rapid detection, and rapid and appropriate and sustainable resolution. So it doesn't mean that no one will ever experience a housing crisis in that community again, but it will be rare, it will be brief, and it will be corrected the first time.
Thank you. And so to the uninitiated, non-expert, and I can say this, Rosanne can't, this in effect means coming as close as possible to ending homelessness in communities, and I think you've achieved that goal in 14?
Well, actually, there are 18 communities in the United States that have now gotten to functional zero for one or more subpopulations, like the chronically homeless. Thank you, but let's be real. It's the communities doing the work. Our team does the coaching. We've created the framework. We help communities implement, as I'll describe later in the conversation, a new way of really thinking about and working on the issue, but it's these communities doing the work, and that's what makes it powerful and gives us the hope and the promise of the change being a lasting one. And once you reach functional zero for one population, the job is to maintain it and to spread that practice to cover everyone. And we see the first 3 communities in the United States within probably a year of reaching that functional zero standard for everyone experiencing homelessness.
Absolutely incredible. A few years ago, as you were starting to reach that goal of functional zero in communities, you told me that one of your biggest challenges, after proving that homelessness is solvable, as you call it, is to actually get leaders in communities to believe it. And at the same time, one of the takeaways I have from your work is that you're incredibly strict on data and data quality and collection, but you really give people a free hand in a way to experiment locally on how to move the needle on those results. And I would love you to share with us how you organize stakeholders in a community. And of course, you can't tell them what to do. So how does that work? How do you mobilize them around an idea that to many is unbelievable, that we can effectively end homelessness? How do you make that kind of collaboration happen? How does that organization work? And what role does data play in achieving those goals?
Well, with the issue of homelessness in the United States, and it will look different in different communities and countries, typically there are about 5 or 6 types of entities that need to be working together as a team to make progress on the issue, like the mayor's office, the county government, the Veterans Administration, the Housing Authority, and the collection of not-for-profits. So that's a kind of a US-specific example, but you'll find an analog in any country. Like, who are the folks who have the relationships, the information, the resources, that if they actually are solving the same problem together and measuring progress in the same way, you see a really transformative set of actions. And so we start with communities that sign on in a voluntary way. This is not a matter of policy where communities are required to change the way they work, but communities that elect to really reach for this goal of functional zero. We help facilitate that group of different actors to come together in almost a single command center type of configuration where they agree to the same aim, which is reaching functional zero homelessness, and identify in that community which population to begin with: families, youth, veterans, the chronically homeless. And then we help those communities acquire, we do the training and kind of the coaching around the kinds of collaborative practices that, frankly, we all need to learn in the 21st century, how to work as a team with folks from different types of organizations that may even have a different professional vocabulary, how to understand the dimensions of an issue in a shared, accurate way. And in homelessness, that means helping communities to create a comprehensive, person-specific, real-time database of who's actually experiencing homelessness and what each individual or family needs, and then rolling that up into also a population-level picture. Because while you need this data to make every individual or household outcome effective, you need to see how the whole system is performing and whether the community's interventions are aimed at the highest leverage activities they could undertake to drive reductions in homelessness overall. And so there's the collaboration piece, there's the working as a team piece, there's learning data analytics, and then we help them implement a learning system, which is, you don't really start with the answer about what you need to do as a community. It's going to be different, as Sascha mentions, from one place to the other, like what assets they have, what particular challenges, what the state of certain systems, like their mental health system, are that might need to be made more robust. And so given where a community starts from, we help them use quality improvement or other learning tools to basically test changes and then either titrate and refine them or move on to another idea. So you kind of escape the battle of ideologies. You're like, we've got the data, we know how to measure what's working now, let's try ideas and then enhance the ones that are working and spread them. And so it's very liberating, as one can imagine. And also, having that real-time and specific data, importantly, allows communities to test whether their interventions are having equitable results. In the United States, and certainly where we work in Canada and Australia, it's very much the case that our Black, Native American, Indigenous populations are very highly and heavily overrepresented in homelessness. And so having that data enables communities to see at each stage of the process of building a system whether it is achieving equitable results. And then I'd say the last piece of this is helping communities to learn how to make decisions on their interventions and investments based on data. Like, what do we need to do that's going to have the greatest benefit for the greatest number of people in terms of new housing investments or rental subsidies or investments in mental health or in prevention strategies? And that data creates kind of a new discipline. And it also, frankly, the process of collecting the data, and it's all collected in a privacy-protected and voluntary way by those individuals who are experiencing homelessness. But having that shared data enables a community to really think in terms of the greater good, not just my program or my client, but everyone's participating in making those kinds of decisions based on the data.
Wow. So to all of you who are not from the US and think that homelessness is particularly bad in the US, I can tell you that in Berlin, where I live, we are at the same levels of homelessness as the average city in the United States. And now imagine a community, I think what you're describing, if I can paraphrase it and maybe try to put an image into everyone's mind, imagine a community where all these actors are jointly believing that this can be brought to zero, that this can be measured, and that once you start measuring it, you can work together and get better every day to get that number to zero. And I think that's such a powerful vision and process. And so I want to switch to Tessy Britton, our fellow from the UK, and tell us what you do and what you've done, maybe in particular in Dagenham and Barking in London.
Thanks, Sascha, and thanks everyone for being here, listening to us. Thankfully, you were spared the argument about the seating arrangements, so I shouldn't really bring that up again. But really, what we envisaged was Sascha was going to be in the sofa in the middle, but he said it was a bit too weird. There was too much tennis or something like that. So I started an organization called Participatory City And we've been working for the last 14 years to develop a new social infrastructure, making it easy for people to participate in common denominator practical activity in their neighborhoods, and working through every single nut and bolt of how to make that as inclusive as possible. And we think it's a new model. It's a model that citizens living in their communities in cities across the world have really been experimenting with. We've just been trying to build the infrastructure to make it possible for a lot of that kind of activity to happen in one place. And all of it really as an excuse to bring diverse people together to build friendship and trust, which we think is key to having cohesive communities. Most of us live in very multicultural cities and neighborhoods, but we haven't built the social infrastructure which gives us shared spaces and opportunities to have time together. So that's what we've been doing, and I think one of the reasons Sascha invited me because I got participatory in my name. And he thought, oh, that'll do. You know, is that right, Sascha? Yeah.
Maybe.
But also because this is working quite well, actually. I think maybe you should go and stand at the podium now. That was our other idea. Well, where was I? Oh, yes. The other reason I think he invited me to speak on this panel was because we worked with 10,000 people over the 7 years we were working in Barking and Dagenham, which is in East London. It's a very large borough, about 220,000 people, very diverse community. But we had about 10,000 residents we worked with. We had 200 organizations, funders, partners, which is really all of those people involved in the co-creation of this vision together, this sort of future vision, where you're not talking about people who live there being in group and new people being out group and sort of targeting them, but inviting everybody into this co-creation of this future neighborhood. But actually what it takes to collaborate on that level, I think we sort of had those numbers at the beginning before we saw the project, and they didn't mean much really, but the actual on the ground, the amount of time and care it takes to collaborate with that level of those number of people is really, we really underestimated that. So I think it's vital that we collaborate on that scale, but also recognize the challenges and make sure that we resource those and have enough resource and skills involved in facilitating that. And I think that's something we've got in common with Rosanne's work.
When we had our prep conversation, you shared some really urgent statistics and data around why social cohesion is such an urgent problem. And I think anyone who's followed the news of what happened in the UK over the past weeks and knows what social cohesion or lack thereof can mean. But can you talk a little bit about what this experience of everyday interacting with others, of almost touching other people and doing something together, what were the public health and public safety, so to speak, outcomes you were pursuing with this? Because it can seem quite a generic infrastructure, because it creates, when you see Tessy's work, and if you look at videos of the work and so forth, it's really incredible, because it's cooking, it's planting, it's kind of all these things happening, but at such a scale for such a long time, that you were really trying to move the needle on outcomes. So can you share a little bit, on the one hand, what those outcomes were you were after, and on the other hand, a little bit, how did you put together such a big and long-term experiment at that scale? Which is, when we talk about doing things properly, there is really no small way of testing this, and that's what I find so audacious, on the one hand. On the other hand, you somehow pulled it off.
Thanks, Sascha. That's the pulling off, thank you. God, you asked me about 5 questions. I've forgotten what the
Okay, so what were the outcomes? Why is social cohesion urgent, and how were you hoping to see change in the community?
I think you can't look at the newspapers without being aware that cohesion is a real issue, and I think that for a long time our attitudes towards multicultural neighborhoods and living together has been very much around accepting that people are naturally drawn to live near each other, people like themselves. So I think that clustering in cities is completely natural and normal. But I think that unless people have a contact with each other, have reason to have friendship across those different communities, it creates lines that can be exploited by people who want to sort of create a them and us society, and we're seeing more and more of that. What we aren't seeing is a lot of people or a lot of cities actually making cohesion really high on their priority list. I think Jim was talking about councils and their priorities, and I think it really needs to be. I think it really needs to be urgent. So the other point on your question about outcomes is that we were a research project, so we could see the seeds of something important with people who building networks of friendship and trust across diverse communities, and we were measuring all sorts of things like health and learning for families, and are you paying this guy?
Yeah.
Is that a drone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The squirrel outside is... They work together, the team.
It's okay, it's calmed down. He's sitting on my lap now, which is obviously also nice. So we were measuring all these outcomes, but having analysed and sort of codified and looked at what we had done, I think there's a lot of ways you can create public health outcomes. You can address loneliness, you can impact environmental measures, be planet positive and so on. But you can actually do a lot of those things without making it inclusive. So a lot of what we've done has been rooted in making every structure, every strategy, every process is about working individually with every single resident we speak to and sort of designing or co-designing, co-creating their perfect way of participating. And that takes a huge amount of coordination, a huge amount of dedication to the idea of inclusivity, not because inclusivity is philosophically nice, which of course it is, and it's very, very important. But you can achieve outcomes by connecting people who are very similar to each other. You don't need to go to all of this trouble, if you like, to make it inclusive. So I think that what we've developed, although it does have those outcomes, I think the most important one is the cohesion aspect, bringing diverse communities together. So it does a lot of things, but I think the reason to do it is around cohesion. And the World Economic Forum has got a cohesion breakdown as one of their top 5 risks over the next 20 or 30 years. So they've identified what a risk it is, but I don't think that that's translated to getting it high enough on the agenda. Even though we've got all of this evidence of things happening, I think we're still relying too much on political methods rather than actually thinking about building those relationships between people, because that really counts. And it's not a few people, it's thousands and thousands of people in a neighborhood need to know and understand and like each other for it to work.
So I think the relevance here, when I said earlier, Rosanne and Tessy are showing us how to do this properly, is kind of an indication of, when we put that into contrast of what Jim Anderson was saying last night, that cities and governments and other institutions, actually almost everyone, haven't really invested in participation for decades and building that kind of infrastructure. And so working out what it takes and what good can look like, what it actually takes. And it's such a big effort. And I think it's really important to say that the participatory city approach, the pilot, was a huge undertaking. but it showed what we need, what it looks like. And I admire both of you, I have to say that right up front, I admire both of you for sticking to what it takes to achieve good results. But also, I think you're describing, both of you in your own ways, are describing something that I think that all of us can imagine together, is a new type of social and collaboration infrastructure and form of participation that puts really different outcomes into reach. Like not debating on how we're treating homelessness, but ending it. Not talking about participation as a democratic undertaking and maybe we need a bit more here or there, but saying, no, it's a resource we need to put at the reach and the service of absolutely everyone, even the hardest to reach people. So I want to ask you to maybe elaborate a little bit further on how you can maybe describe what this new infrastructure can look like. If we imagine a little bit a journey into the future, if we imagine a slightly better place where all of us work together, what are the characteristics of this new way of working? What does it take in terms of investment and holding one another accountable? And maybe, Rosanne, you can start by kind of laying out a little bit what that infrastructure might look like.
Sure, and Tessy and I were observing earlier that like in any community, you might need to build this just once, because it's not as though you need the infrastructure for reducing homelessness or for having a participatory neighborhood. But you do need to solve the governance problems that Jim Anderson mentioned, and we'd like to make sexy again. Just how do you enable all of the very worthy, innovative programs to add up to more than the sum of the parts? And so what we found in our work is that you actually need, at the hub of all of these activities that relate to homelessness and housing, you need essentially almost an air traffic control system. So you need a single place, physically, virtually, where all of the key actors are coming together, pursuing the same standard of what the outcome should look like, measuring progress in the same way, reporting that publicly, having the capacity to facilitate conversation and agreement across different lanes of work, having the data that is co-created, trusted, everyone is participating and sharing the outcomes of their individual efforts, and also making decisions in light of what is going to have the greatest overall benefit for the community. And this way of working in homelessness, interestingly, we've seen in a number of the communities we support, this moment inevitably comes where the group is like, we should be working this way all the time on everything complex, whether it's child welfare issues or recidivism from the criminal justice system or climate issues. It really is about what's the architecture to support collaboration to get to shared outcomes. But Tessy, what would you add?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the expectation that lots of actors are going to spontaneously start working together is just a fallacy. I think it doesn't happen. And I think that organizations in even local government aren't really resourced to it. They're not measured against collaboration measures. So I think having a resource and having that resourced as well is just priceless. I don't think you can do it without that.
Yeah. No, you have to pay for it, of course. And this is like, we know, all of us social entrepreneurs, like every dime we raise typically, or euro, goes into the program. But you need to actually resource this collaborative infrastructure, which makes everyone's efforts more powerful.
There's this huge, yes. And I think there's this huge democratic and societal dividend in there, right? Solving homelessness destigmatizes the condition, right? And I think one of the incredible things is when you look in more detail into the kind of data and work that Rosanne is doing and the cities are doing that are working with her, is to actually show that homelessness isn't one thing, but comes in many, many different shades, and it really isn't a self-inflicted thing that a lot of parts of society may think it is, right? It's not something you choose or you create for yourself. And at the same time, participation, and when Ashoka talks about people becoming change makers, when you work backwards from it, becoming a change maker means that you have the courage to step up and do something. And to have the courage, you need to have the belief that your actions can do something, and which means you need to have an experience of participation. And you have people encouraging you that you are able to change things. You need to learn that. You need to build up the courage. And of course, that requires that infrastructure. And that infrastructure starts not just from being able to be in a room, but actually learning participation, experiencing it with other groups, and being destigmatized, right? So I think what you're describing here is really an infrastructure for all forms of kind of participation. And I think this is what is so powerful. And we need this urgently. My question here is the world ready for this? Are there signs that, that we're moving, that the world is getting readier for this, and that there's traction around these kind of ideas and infrastructures?
They're ready for the work, but they've got a way to go, haven't they? I mean, can I just make a point on the change maker thing? I think that I consider all 10,000 people who've been involved in our project to be change makers. But they haven't had to be change makers in the most extraordinary way. They've been change makers coming in for an hour at a time or 2 hours at a time when it fits around their lives. And we're talking about a community where people have 2 jobs, or they have mental health issues, or they have health issues. And every single person that I've ever met in our community that's taken part has had some challenge. Sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, different kinds of challenges. But building the infrastructure which enables people to be a change maker on their terms, on the way that they can contribute, is an incredibly powerful thing. And I think that they have fundamentally changed what it's like to live in that neighborhood for those people around them. So it may be small, it may be piecemeal, but collectively it has had a huge impact. And so I think, you know, that's the kind of infrastructure, I think, giving people the opportunity to get a taste for it and to develop their ideas and to continue along their path. It's really important.
I'd say, I think everyone working in social welfare or in local government knows that this is what's missing. It's a hard initial transition, I'll say, though, because what is incented and reinforced is competing for grants or staying in one's own lane. And, you know, I think a lot of us kind of got comfortable saying, well, it's their fault that I'm not making more progress. And this actually calls the question, like, what if we all showed up together in a new way? And helping people through that process, that's what our team does. And it's always about learning to do it better and learning from those, you know, we're working with. But intellectual readiness, absolutely. Emotional readiness, it's a work in progress.
And what is the relationship between, so as we're talking about infrastructure, what is the relationship between bringing homelessness to functional zero, effectively ending it, and funding? Is it a matter of money in the community? Is it expensive to end homelessness? Can you help us debunk that? And what is the role of funding to fund this long-term work and building this infrastructure that we're talking about, which is kind of supporting what you were describing, guiding communities into the right direction and to build those kind of skills and capabilities?
Well, the infrastructure that's necessary for homelessness is, and you know, Tessy can expand on this when you get to a whole neighborhood scale, but it's got to be someone's job to actually convene this multi-stakeholder team and to hold people to their commitments, and also to gather, collect, and share the data on what's working, and to follow up with individual organizations in terms of the commitments they make to take the lead in certain situations, resolving this family's situation or that individual's situation. So that doesn't have to be huge at all, but it does have to be funded in a neutral way, you know, and that it's not like one agency's control, because we find that at least at the beginning, at the outset of this work, it has to be trusted as a neutral space. So that needs to be funded, that infrastructure. And then depending on the reality in the particular community, if they need to expand their mental health services, they're going to have to spend money on that. If they need to deal with their zoning or build more housing, that's going to be an expense. But one of the powerful things that's certainly been true in North America and Australia and the European countries where we're engaged is so much money is being spent not solving homelessness. The costs are showing up in healthcare and criminal justice, in public works, in many organizations, just reinventing the wheel type efforts, and expressed in the frustration of staff, and just the turnover that comes as a result of that. Municipal employees being diverted to deal with homelessness. So there is an awful lot of resource that gets recovered and repurposed. So it's not necessarily, in any ways, moving from no cost to cost. It's actually repurposing and having more effective public and philanthropic dollars spent. But the other thing that is, I think, quite significant, as we're seeing in many of these communities, there is an enormous gain in terms of community efficacy and cohesion. It's hard to put a price tag on that, which is like, I have confidence in my community. I actually trust that government can be effective. I have more satisfied staff because they're actually seeing progress in their work. And so there's no zero cost answer to some of these complex problems, but there's a best and successful investment approach. And I think that these collaborative efforts are showing the path.
And we talked about this, right, in the preparation, that both of you, when you started out this work at different points, you didn't really promise or guarantee any outcomes. You said, we're doing something at scale to learn, and we're showing how our learning can be improved every day to get closer to the outcomes, to zero in the end. I think years before you might not have imagined that it's possible, right? And now suddenly it's come within reach by kind of figuring out how it can be done. Mm-hmm. And Tessy, you mentioned in our prep call, when we talked about funding, you said 88% of the national lottery grants in the UK are £10,000 or less for 1 year. So we're throwing tiny bits of money, all probably about participation in some form or other, but never building the infrastructure that it takes. So can you share your thinking about what the world needs to actually lift ourselves out of this desert into having the infrastructure that allows us to build the kind of cohesion we need in communities?
Yeah, I think ultimately, what Rosanne is also describing is actually a lot of these really network problems are generated by neighborhoods, and that the kind of funding that you're describing there, I mean, the lottery have a good reason for doing that. They're trying to distribute money fairly and sensibly of their own resources, but it's not actually fundamentally changing the neighborhoods. And we see that a lot with lots of services which are maintaining problems at a level, but aren't actually saying, what is it going to take to stop that or solve that or bring it down to zero, which I think is incredible. And I think that we need to find ways of resourcing large-scale, but also collaborative efforts. I think some of the discussion I found most exciting with Rosanne over the last couple of days is just the idea of many innovations, highly developed innovations. You've been working on yours 20 years, I've been working on mine 14 years. These are highly developed innovations, and they've had millions of dollars or pounds invested in them. How do we bring those together in single neighborhoods and single cities and actually show people what's possible. And I think that's going to take a new kind of resourcing. I don't think we can expect individual cities to step up and say, oh, let's do that. But I think we need some sort of new kind of resourcing which is going to be showing what's possible and proving what it takes, because I think that's the question that has been uppermost in our mind, is what does it actually take? And I think very often we say, well, we've got X pounds or X euros, and we've got 6 months, and we've got 10 people, let's see how that goes. And instead we need to be actually resourcing things enough to make this longer development journey to show what's really going to be effective, rather than guessing on a very short time scale and a very small amount of money.
It's kind of what you, go.
Yeah, can I just say, I've always believed that homelessness is solvable, just didn't know how to get there. So,
right.
But we're and just so everyone has confidence in this issue, no matter where you are, as awful as this is, it's less than 1% of the population of whatever community you're in. It's uncanny. And if you think of it, like, we've solved 99% of the problem, like, that gives you a lot of energy.
Yeah, that's great.
Incredibly important. And I think it's the relevance of all of this, and the relevance why we're diving so deep into this topic of multi-stakeholder collaboration is, of course, many Ashoka Fellows are working on issues that they think are solvable. And many of them need this kind of infrastructure. And I think what is so special here in your examples and in these conversations is to hear what are the mechanics, what are the kind of steps we need to take, what is the science of it, the data of it, but also there's a lot of human work around it. And these journeys aren't short. It takes time, and we always want to make ourselves believe that we're solving these problems in 3 years from now, and it always ends up taking 40, 50, 60, 100 years. These journeys...
Thanks, Sascha. That's really...
It's very encouraging.
It's really inspiring.
Yeah, yes. see it as a liberating... It's a liberating idea to take things slow. But I want to...
I think someone wrote a book about that, didn't they?
I don't know, someone has, yeah. But I want to... there's something important here I want to get out of you guys before I release you, and before we can continue giggling outside. And that is, we have, and it's a real first for the Ashoka Changemaker Summit, we have a lot of young changemakers here in the room, from many different countries with many different ideas. This question isn't directly about your work, but I think it's important that we anchor what we're talking about here also in our responsibility to support young changemakers in their journeys. So I want to kind of end on this question to each of you. What can we, all of us here in the room, do to help young changemakers who want to kind of bring their ideas to fruition, contribute to change, to support their work to achieve those goals?
I think us older fellows should actively mentor up-and-coming fellows and changemakers. We've, at Community Solutions, been a fiscal sponsor for a number of young entrepreneurs, and proud that a couple of them are now Ashoka Fellows, but that's something we can do that's practical.
Yeah. I think more of us should offer to be on the boards of young changemakers organisations, because I think being a social entrepreneur on a board is very different from people with different backgrounds. So I think they could bring a lot to those situations.
We talked about one of the qualities of a good person on a board is someone who really engages in the work and the journey and sticks around for a while to really make sure that together we're learning and developing the ideas and the strategies that work. So a big thank you to Tessy and Rosanne. Thank you.
So, quick poll. Did they make multi-stakeholder collaboration sexy again? Okay, I would say Sascha, do you see it? I think we need another panel, but it's okay. No, I think we're in a good way. Thanks for sharing your precious and long-lasting work, and also like how incredible 3 fellows having fun with each other. This is also heartwarming, and seeing the community. And quick spoiler, yeah, it was Sascha's book, Slow Lane, and he actually wrote a whole chapter about Rosanne in his book. So the love is true. So between the fellow love. And enough from the love and all the other beautiful things, on to session number 4, because we have great inputs and insights in the next sessions for you. Please find the room of your sessions, and I'm going to see you back here at 4:45, because we have Anne and Lutz on stage, and we're going to dive into like social entrepreneurship and how to support here in Hamburg. Let's go.